So I switched my mindset into I want my network, my group of friends to be in my industry so that not only are we just going out and having drinks together, but we might actually work together. We might be able to further each other's careers. And to me, that's what business development is all about. Number one, I want to find people who I actually like. Uh,
Hello, this is Doug Newell, and I'm on Property Pulse. Today, our guest is Brent Hebert. Brent's an accomplished architect with a passion for technology.
Thank you, Doug. Happy to be on your podcast. My name is Brent. I'm a licensed architect, got a few states under my belt. I work for a company called EMC2 Group here in Austin, Texas. And I also run my own company, ATX Architect, which, as you can imagine, is a company that curates and develops technology, mostly software tools for other architects. I go out and do some research and I find products and tools that I feel are kind of at that groundbreaking kind of levels. I want to see an exponential jump in the software tools that we use in our industry, so that it's not limited to architects either. I'm interested in the engineering side and the real estate side as well.
Great. I'm interested particularly in the real estate side, and based upon all the data we've gathered up about real estate, we are now extending into the insurance side. They've got a lot in common, at least in property and casualty and such. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing in real estate, if you can tell me.
I suppose in my day job, so to speak, I'm a project manager and I have a few churches that I'm working on, and I also do some business development stuff. So I go out, build and develop relationships that lead to projects and get us in the door. And in that process, and there's talk about technology, there's all kinds of tools for business development. You have your CRMs, essentially. One thing that I'm also working on is to develop CRMs that are more friendly for architects and designers. One product that I've developed is a portfolio creator, an online portfolio creator, where as you build your own portfolios, you actually have to create contacts to send the portfolios to, and you can get back and forth notifications through that. So frankly, I see our industry as just absolutely ripe for innovation.
Yes.
That's one thing that I've noticed for a long time. Autodesk is one of the big ones in my industry. That's the creators of AutoCAD and Revit, very prominent throughout the world. But because they have somewhat of a monopoly on the market, there's been a stifling of innovation, particularly on the software design side, for the software tools side. So most of my career has been paying really close attention to the design side of things, the software tools that designers use. But I see the same gap in the market for every other industry. Technologies, particularly information technology, grows as an exponential rate, and it's an exquisitely smooth line, and you can almost predict where the line's going to land at a certain point in time. Ray Kurzweil is a big proponent of this. I think he's the guy who really invented that exponential growth of information technologies. If you project out 10 years, 20 years from now, it starts to get really weird. You have AI and you have all of this new technology that right now we're just playing with. We don't even know what it's going to be. And so I'm out there paying close attention to all of the startups that are new. There's a few that I'm particularly interested in that I'm following that I think will give Autodesk a run for their money. And there's several facets to it that I look at to see what might have a good chance of getting there.
I spend a lot of time in the construction area. Do you see the architecture area being automated as flowing down such that you tell a contractor, build this first or pre-assemble that, or using the power of AI? We know there is a housing shortage to the point where it's affecting the population of the United States, that not enough babies are being born, and now the government's talking about sending a check to everybody who has a kid. That's because there aren't enough homes, and that gets back to the construction industry and then upstream from there to the architecture industry. So these improvements you see coming, will that be reflected in faster homes or cheaper homes?
That's a good question. I think that should be the motive behind the technology, right? The motive should be there's a deeper motive than just the finances and just the speed of construction. There's another thing happening here where the digital and virtual worlds are receiving much more investment than the actual real physical world right now. And so not only do we want to make construction more affordable and faster, it also needs to compete on a human attention. How compelling is the built environment versus a virtual environment? People spending more and more time in virtual reality is obviously one thing, but another thing is just staring at our phones. It's being raised with AI companions. It's all of these existential questions we're going to have to start thinking real about, because no longer is this stuff science fiction. It's actually here, and we need to figure out how to use it in a way that that hits those three things, right? We need faster construction, we need cheaper, more affordable construction, and we need it to be compelling enough that keeps people engaged in the real world. That's something that I'm particularly more passionate about as an architect. Obviously, budget and construction time matters a lot, but there's one software out there that I'm particularly paying attention to. I think they call it 4D. It's 4D BIM instead of just your regular building information modeling, and that's taking the three-dimensional assets or the three-dimensional design that architects create virtually, architects and engineers create virtually, and that's putting it into a software environment where it actually, you have your Gantt chart for construction and you have your critical path. This actually three-dimensionally models and animates the construction process. It hasn't caught on mainstream yet. I do keep getting videos suggested to me on YouTube to watch them, and it's kind of mind-blowing. But that's kind of a pretty practical non-AI innovation that's happening, and that's an interesting thing to note too. There's so much innovation to be had in our industry and in the AE real estate space without AI that I think it's going to be kind of confusing where AI starts and then other non-AI solutions begin.
You're right. It's going to become ubiquitous that, for example, with all this data I have on every house in the United States, about 16,000 pieces of information about each of them, I've been pulled into the insurance space, and I'm in discussions with someone who's particularly interested in predicting at an individual rooftop level what the consequences would be of a hailstorm where the hail is 2 inches in diameter or something like that. It sounds like that same 4D technology that you mentioned could be used in simulating natural disasters. We've seen it happen already without AI, just through engineering in terms of earthquakes. Years ago, San Francisco had an earthquake, and I think like 6 people died or something like that. If that same magnitude earthquake had hit New Delhi, where the building codes aren't the same, you would have had hundreds of thousands of people die. I think simulating all sorts of things with AI, maybe you do a sweep of the building with a drone and you see how close the shrubbery is to the building. It turns out that unless you have 5 foot of hardscape around your building, in most wildfires, everything in your building is going to be melted into dust. We're going into the natural disaster prediction biz at a rooftop level using AI.
That brings me to another point. One of the other issues is that we have a very fragmented process about how we go through things now. I started out my career doing mixed-use master planning, so it's multiple buildings, multiple city blocks, and master planning the entire thing together. And you have a mixture of uses like residential, office, restaurant, retail. It's all mashed together, and it kind of creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. If you build it, they will come kind of thing. But the issue is, and this is just one example on the architecture side, a client will give us 2 weeks to put together a conceptual design for one of these master plans. We will use 7 different software programs to put that together. And that's 7 different software platforms you're paying for individually, 7 different platforms spitting out files that you're storing on a server that you're paying for that server space. And then you have these softwares that your general contractor is using, like Conslog or Procore, which are great to aggregate the project files together. But what I see being necessary, especially in the future, in this exponential future, is we need a centralized place where all of this stuff can be aggregated. And we're getting closer, but with every startup that comes up with a new version of it, we're actually adding more fragmentation, not less. On the subject of aggregating data, this is an important one too, because if you go into local zoning, like we have an aggregation of building codes, IBC, that a lot of different ordinances adopt. Zoning ordinances, every single city, every single county has their own. And they're all on different systems. They're all aggregating that data becomes something only AI can go in and do all that research and
Mhm.
pull it all together for you.
Yeah.
But it's very disorganized and very fragmented.
Yeah. I run into the same thing. There are 2,600 builders in the United States that build more than 50 homes a year. They all have their little silo of data. I came upon one, and basically his mother-in-law was doing the books while he was out building, and she was doing some bad things from a statistical point of view to the data, such that it would have been a huge investment to clean it up. And with 2,600 of them, however, I came out with the concept of a builders consortium where it encouraged them to put their data into a common repository, especially the medium size and the big ones. And then that data would all be sanitized as far as privacy. You couldn't tell that you were looking at one of your competitors' data. You pour it all in so you could get the benefits of AI, because with 2,600 competitors out there, AI lives and breathes and eats data. And if you don't have enough data, you don't get the benefits of AI, which eventually will mean the extinction of your business.
Where do you sit on the privacy side of things? Because obviously this is a conversation that quickly leads to globalism, where everything's interconnected and physical boundaries don't really mean much, but that opens up a huge door for corruption.
It does.
I wonder what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I think we've got to recognize it and sort of cure the problem before it happens. I won't take in any data that has something like a social security number on it. That makes it radioactive. I don't want to be anywhere near it, because lawyers will descend on you and you're going to be out of business if you have that kind of stuff. It's sort of knowing the rules of the road beforehand. And on the catastrophe side of our business, we're not bringing in names. We're bringing in addresses. An address, a building, in my point of view, doesn't have privacy. How many doors on the garage, and are there shrubs up against the building? No, that's not privacy. The name or phone number or something of somebody who lives there, now you've crossed over into privacy. People have privacies, garage doors don't.
Yeah, interesting.
You also mentioned you do business development. Can you tell me about that? I come from the old world of direct mail and things like that to try to sell something to somebody. I'm fascinated by how you might be approaching it.
It's a little bit of a newer thing for me. I've only been at it for a couple of years now. But I mean, the standard career path for an architect is you go to school, you do your 5-6 years. Ideally, you get the degree that allows you to become licensed someday, and then you take your exams, study really hard, and during that period, you actually have to sacrifice a lot of your social life to get your exams passed and to get that license. But once you get your license, this is what happened to me anyways. I didn't know what to do with myself after that. Um, Becoming an architect was the thing that I had pursued for so long. I didn't think well beyond that. Obviously, a lot of architects think about starting their own business or want to do their own practice, but the reality of that sets in once you actually get the license and you actually realize, I don't have any idea about business. I'm not educated at all on business. And then where do you start? I don't want to go back to school. I'd spent enough time in my youth in school. I would rather not go back. The conclusion I came to was, well, I can learn the fundamentals of business. I've already opened the door to get into the industry by getting the license. The next logical step for me was to start becoming competent in business. And in our industry, it's a professional services industry. There's no way around developing relationships to become competent in the business of professional services. It's really, that's really the number one thing. We're not doing cold calls. We're not sending out cold emails. We're teaming up with people that we're going to be tied to for the duration of the design process and the construction process. And there's a thing that happened to me when I moved to Austin. Austin is a very young, very social, vibrant type of city. When I moved here, immediately I knew that I wanted to do was network, and I wanted to meet and make as many friends as possible. And in the first couple of years of being here, all of the friends that I made were not in my industry. They were the people that you meet, your neighbors, the people that you go out and do activities with, but none of that time spent with them were productive towards my career. And I ended up kind of spending way too much time developing relationships that really don't have any outcome for me in terms of professional. So I switched my mindset into, I want my network, my group of friends to be in my industry so that not only are we just going out and having drinks together, but we might actually work together. We might be able to further each other's careers. And to me, that's what business development is all about. Number one, I want to find people who I actually like. I've figured out recently the types of personalities I should probably stay away from because I happen to have a pretty strong dominant personality type. And business development to me is purely about developing genuine relationships with people that are adjacent to you in your field. And when you go out and do Top Golf or go play 18 holes or go to a basketball game with a group of people in your industry, not only are you checking that box of I need to have a social life, you're also checking the other boxes of, hey, I'm growing in my career. I'm taking on a whole new challenge beyond just architecture, beyond just doing the drawings.
Yeah.
And so far, it's been enlightening. It's been
Good.
very challenging, very, very challenging, but it's very enlightening. And
I think that's common among entrepreneurs. You get some entrepreneurs who know what they're selling. My mother-in-law had a cloth shop for people who sewed for a hobby. So she knew lots and lots about cloth and how to buy it, but not too much about actually running the business. And I think probably half the entrepreneurs out there love their subject so much, but don't know the business side. So you found yourself in that position. But eventually you and your comrades have to sell something to the outside. Does business just walk in the door? Or if you team up with 5 others, you've got something to talk about. But where's the business come in?
that's the $1 million question right there.
Okay. Most of your stuff is business to business, right? For a single house, unless it's an elaborate one, they're not bringing in an architect, right? They probably have canned plans.
I mean, it depends sometimes on whether or not you need a permit, but a civil team can sometimes do that. Here in Austin, the civil actually leads the development process with the city, which is kind of different. But yeah, you're correct.
Yeah. Okay. I had somebody approach me at a builders convention, and he wanted to know who could partner with him to sell wine cellars. He did the air conditioning for a wine cellar, and I said, yeah, we can do that. And I can go into my database and find every house over. You probably start getting into wine cellar land at about 2 million. Every house worth over 2 million. And then I can backtrack to who built it and who sold it to them. And if you had a list of people who build multi-million-dollar houses, there may be some way to target the people who are the decision makers in major projects.
There's one thing that I'm trying to really keep in mind when I'm going through this process, and that's not to focus on what you're getting from these relationships. This is super cliche, but focusing on what you can give to that person. I've worked for 2 companies now that I've been tasked with doing business development for them, and they're established in one market, but they're trying to expand into a new market, which turns out is a very difficult thing to do. It turns out that it doesn't matter how vibrant that market is, because when you go in there, all of the relationships are more or less already developed. All of the companies that are established there already know who they trust. They don't want to take the risk of taking on new partners. And when you're going into a situation like that, you have to think really creatively about how to stand out, how to get people to trust you. Unless you want to spend $200,000 in 2 years doing all of the business development and developing the relationships, that could lead to absolutely nothing. And especially here in Texas, it's the friendly state. Everybody's going to be your friend to your face. That doesn't mean they're going to give you opportunities. I've learned that the hard way as well. You have to be bold, I think, and you have to, again, think about what you're bringing to the table. And in our case, the company I work for now, one of the ways to kickstart that is to actually buy out a smaller company in that new location. That'll make it so that you might have to spend 1.5 million instead of 200,000, but 200,000 doesn't guarantee you anything. Whereas if you buy a business locally in that market, you can work with them. In our case, we have a client that's building churches out here. We're not coming in here empty-handed. We have, our partners that we're used to working with in that arena, who we've done several projects with before. But what you have to do when you get into a new market is you need to start little by little engaging with the local talent there. And in our case, we're coming into this market with actual projects. That means we have something of value, but we're attacking it from several different angles, if you will. We're going through the process now of buying out a local firm. I'm project managing these churches, and I have to get a couple of them under my belt before I start pushing my local contacts here. Because I've got local contacts that I'd love to get them engaged in my projects. I'm not going to just go to a general contractor out here and say, hey, give us something. It's going to be, I'm going to try to get you guys involved in what I already have going on, but I need to be strategic about it because I can't just go to the owner of the projects that we're on and say, hey, we should use these guys instead. It's tricky. If you don't have more than one strategy going into an environment like that, your odds of succeeding, I think, are significantly reduced.
I agree. Seems like in your case, you need to get sort of up the pipeline. I think of a lot of business as a funnel. You have so many thousand possibilities, and then in the end, it comes down to, 20 that are mostly likely to buy and 15 that actually buy. And that keeps you going. So up way at the top of the funnel, are there chambers of commerce that you ought to be networking with, or some part of the corporate hierarchy? Is there somebody, well, you're down in Austin, so is there somebody in the Musk organization that is in charge of building buildings for them? I mean,
yeah, there's lots. A core strategy of going out and doing business development is just to go out and get exposure. And the way that you
yes,
do that is through the events that all kinds of organizations put on. So there's ULI, Urban Land Institute, there's SMPS, I forget what the
I
acronym
see.
stands for, but there's BizNow, there's Austin Built, there's all kinds of organizations. There are probably 10 that you can join. There's RECA, Real Estate Council of Austin. What they do is they offer opportunities for people to get together. Back in, I don't know, hundreds of years ago, you had church. That's one place that people went to go congregate, and you had maybe a public court or something. And these days, people don't go to church to network or to interact with other people. The church serves a different function than that. In my mind, the more you can get out there and get in front of other people, and these are like coffee networking ordeals. These are dinners. I had no idea what I was doing when I first got into this. I had no idea there were all these organizations that you can join. But then once you realize that there's an abundance of them, it's really not about which one you join. It's just about going out there and participating in the community.
That sounds very reasonable. And you seem to be an extrovert. And,
Yep.
can we go back to the technology for a minute? I'm wondering, you're evaluating pieces of software or how they might fit into usually the architecture world. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you know how you do architecture, and here's a piece of software, and how well does it fit? Do you know anything about the sort of the underlying AI that they're applying?
I mentioned Revit before, and that's a building information modeling. That's kind of the premier software all architects are using. And I've been using Revit since basically I was in high school, so I know it really super well. And it's a software that's incredibly powerful. It doesn't use any AI. People are experimenting with AI now. They're coming up with their own tools, and I'm sure Autodesk is experimenting with that. But generative design is where the AI comes in. Generative design is where you give it a set of constraints, and AI will spit out like however many different options you want. If I want more sunlight, it can automatically do this, and it's a tricky one.
Break that into a materials list.
Yeah, and every single aspect of what we do can be shaped by this, down to the specifications manual, everything. But one of the issues is that Revit is so super powerful, but it has a really steep learning curve. And it takes a long time to become competent in it. That's one weakness it has, but the data aggregation is another weakness, I think. Some of the platforms that I'm looking into now are web-based, so they're browser-based. You go to a web browser and you type it in. Archeologics is the one that I'm looking into right now. And that allows, if you have a bunch of people using a web app to study designs,
Yep.
and the web app is accessible and it's easy to learn. This is an interesting one because Archeologics is kind of a test fit software. You can upload a PDF and draw walls and place furniture. The furniture models in there are actually models from a furniture supplier. And when you place that piece of furniture in there, you get an automatic budget, a cost breakout of every piece of furniture.
Really?
And you can
I
actually
had
order.
no idea it was that slick.
You can directly order the furniture. Not only can you send your customer or your client a link to this to get, hey, here's the budget for this, and I didn't have to assemble this in Revit and print a PDF of it and do all of that standard stuff. Archeologic's deal is you can draw the basics of if you have an office layout, drag and drop furniture in there, place it around, and then it automatically creates this budget for you. And then because it's web based, all of the furniture, TVs, its motion sensors, its desks, all of those, all of the prices are automatically set by the furniture manufacturer who has a deal with Arcologics. They're doing a few things, and not to sell them super hard on this, but their approach intrigues me not only because it's a web app, but what they're doing is they're looking at what do furniture suppliers really want? Well, they want sales. So how do we mold that into our product and get them on board? And then what do designers want the most? They want projects. And so they have another side of their platform, I think they call it Open Arcade, where designers can actually try to get work through the platform.
Smart.
Yeah, those are two things that Revit's not going to do.
What is the interface if somebody's using Revit? Is there a handoff so that the builder, the contracting company, can use Revit, and it tells them basically how to build this structure?
Right now, they're quite separate, and although I know how to get them to talk to each other, it's not likely that a lot of people right now, and that's a tricky thing too, because if you as a software developer for architects, and you're actually competing with Autodesk or you're competing with a Revit, and you're wanting your platform to interface with Revit, you're kind of in a roundabout way advertising Revit. So, it creates this issue where the majority of architects and designers are using Revit in the construction side of things. It's very rarely used for design, although you can use it for that. They're all using this. And so another issue is it's like pulling teeth trying to get a designer to learn a new software. It's like, I have this like an artist, I have this paintbrush,
Right.
and somebody comes along and says, no, use this paintbrush. It's better. The artist is going to tell you to take a hike. Like, this is my art. So, it's particularly when you've spent so much time investing in getting yourself to a level of competency with one platform, it's really mentally taxing to try to take on a new software. So these are all issues. These are all things that have contributed to the lack of innovation in that specific space. But I think that also carries out to all of the other portions of it, because the real estate side of things should be integrated into that process.
Yes.
The local zoning should be integrated into that process. Right now, what we have to do as architects is we have to go to the local zoning. We have to manually go through and see what's the front yard setback, what's the rear and side yard setback, what's the height limitation, where are the easements, and we have to assemble all that stuff manually in Revit, which is a local file on your machine, and your real estate people aren't involved in that at all. You have every different party, which there are a lot in the built environment. It's a team effort. There's so many different sides of the team, and everybody's looking at something different. And at the end of the day, everybody's looking at a PDF, which a PDF can be faked. And so it's riddled with that type of issue. Again, it's the lack of central place for all team members to go and get access to the vital information.
Right. And again, with my funnel analogy, any place the funnel isn't connected going down, I think is an economic opportunity for entrepreneurs like us.
Absolutely.
If Revit is the dominant one and it doesn't have a nice interface so that all that great information can be filtered into a view that the builder could take on his pad to the site and say, no, this has to be this way or whatever, because of the covenants of the property or whatever data you're talking about. That's an economic opportunity that if somebody can find the APIs from Revit, pull down the data and do something with it, then you just walk around to all the builders and say, hey, look what I found. Yes, you have to buy Revit, but you can do this job faster.
Yeah.
It's all about speed.
Yeah, and it's a massive lack of efficiency. It's interesting what you said about every disconnect in that funnel creates an economic opportunity. And that's the core thesis of my argument, which is why there is so much space for innovation in the industry. There's so much space for even very simple things. An example of something that I've built is the portfolio creator that mashes together with the CRM. Now, it's not exactly available yet. I'm still working out the kinks, but those are two disconnected things. Portfolio that I need to send out to my connections, my connections over here on some separate CRM. And that's just one very simple example of connecting two things. But when you zoom out and look big picture, you have that happening hundreds of places in the overall process, from your concept design or from your pro forma that the developer's putting together, that the landowner's putting together, to that final punch list walk through. There's so many different places. And the other thing is there's so many different companies zooming in on different parts of that it's almost not helping. We're talking about a massive, massive undertaking.
I read somewhere that the real estate market in the United States is a $7 trillion business. And then I read someplace else that it was 8 trillion. Whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of money there. And if you can figure out how to build a house in 30 days or something by having a flow of information that is monitoring where it is every step of the way and finding the blockages and going around them or whatever, you will be a very rich person.
It's a tough one. I will say one thing about Revit, because it's such a powerful platform. That was a tool that billions of dollars were invested into, and that's what made it the dominant force in the industry is the level of investment that was pushed into it. So in order to create something along the lines of what we're talking about, it would require a massive investment.
Right.
But the payoff would be
You don't
absolutely
try to
enormous.
go through Revit, you try to go around it or whatever. Replacing Revit, again, that's like in quantitative analysis. SAS was such a big deal, and I've got about 26 years experience in artificial intelligence. And the first 14 of that time was wandering around to Citicorp and Bank of America and others that had a lot of data and convincing them that I could do a better job. And the first question out of the head quantitative guy's mouth is, are you compatible with SAS? And I chose not to lie to them. No, we don't use SAS or statistics at all. And their head would spin around and explode. I realized trying to replace SAS, they loved SAS. SAS was a social organization for them as well as a tool for the workplace, and it differentiated. So yeah, I think you buttress a Reddit or figure out some way around it or get an API to suck things out of it. Creating the next Reddit sounds like an expensive proposition that nobody's going to invest in since there's already one that's dominant.
Yeah, I mean, the payoff, I'm astonished that the company did invest as much as they did in that software. Honestly, it's kind of an anomaly, but look at the payoff.
Yes.
Autodesk has massively benefited from it. And whatever that next one looks like, it's up to anybody's imagination. One thing that's very interesting on the AI front, the generative design, is when this starts to mature and it starts to reach its potential with the amount of power that it has already. We're not talking about the ability to enable the design process for individual projects. This is something that will be able to create entire worlds, not an entire Earth full of any kind of imaginative structures you can imagine, and that's an intense proposition, and we're talking years, not decades, before we have that ability.
Yeah, and bringing all sorts of factors that wouldn't be considered before, optimizing for fire hazards and weather, making sure the roofs, they've got some roofing material now that when a hailstone hits, it's like memory foam, and the hailstone hits and slowly it goes back to shape, kind of thing. The ability of the AI to evaluate the economics of that and all sorts of other things and sort of optimize the houses, reducing the 2.5 trillion that's been spent on repairing things.
Yeah, I wonder what the comparison would look like if it's 7 or 8 trillion in the built environment. And you said that's just in the US?
Yes.
I wonder how that compares to the investment right now in, server farms and AI. Because something interesting that I see happening is we're going to see more and more of that money going towards digital and virtual. And it's got to come from somewhere. So where else is it going to come from other than our real actual world? And so that's something that I don't know if worries me is the right phrase, but it's something I'm paying attention to because especially with kids growing up in the world, how do you keep the engagement with the real more compelling, or at least as compelling as the virtual. Because AI has all these problems that we can solve with it. We can aggregate data, we can create entire worlds that are digital, that are alien seeming and just mind blowing. And if that's the future we're looking at, how do we keep people engaged in the real actual world?
Yeah.
How do our structures, how do our community buildings and schools, how do they keep people engaged in the real world? Because if we let the real world decay, we're going to start seeing something like idiocracy happening in real life, or like, the Matrix. You mentioned earlier about the reaction that you get from people when, with SaaS. When you challenge somebody's reality, they say this in
Yes.
the Matrix, they will defend it violently if necessary,
Yes.
even though their way of thinking is primitive or whatever it might be. It's like what they say, humankind as a whole is smart, but individuals are stupid.
Well, I'd like to thank you again for participating. It's been fun.
Of course. Thank
And
you,
I
Doug.
think your final point there that you made will leave our audience thinking about. Yeah, there is a trade-off between going out and riding your bicycle and playing video game, and they both are stimulating and probably different parts of the brain at different times. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper creating a video game than a real world, but you need both. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And if you need anything that I can do, we do prediction.